When Daniel Reeves signed the foreclosure papers on the old Cortez Sugar Mill for $350, the county clerk stared at him like he'd just purchased his own tombstone. The building hadn't processed a single cane in 19 years, its machinery corroded into twisted sculptures of rust and failure, its conveyor belts sagging like broken spines across 3 acres of Louisiana swampland. But Daniel wasn't buying potential. He was buying walls and a roof for himself and his 9-year-old son, Lucas, because the rent on their trailer was 6 weeks overdue and his offshore rig job had vanished when oil prices collapsed. Sometimes desperation wears the mask of opportunity if you're desperate enough to believe it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Daniel stood in the cracked asphalt lot on a humid October afternoon, his truck engine ticking as it cooled under the relentless Louisiana sun. Lucas pressed against his side despite the heat, his small fingers gripping the hem of Daniel's faded work shirt. The mill loomed before them like something out of a fever dream. For stories of corrugated metal and rotting wood planks, surrounded by fields gone wild with kudzu and sawgrass. A rusted sign still clung to the main building, letters barely legible through decades of coastal weather. Cortez Sugar Refinery, established 1947. The name meant nothing to Daniel, just another piece of forgotten industry in a parish full of them. Lucas's grip tightened. "It looks haunted, Dad." Daniel couldn't argue. The sugar mill looked exactly like what it was, abandoned, dangerous, and absolutely not the kind of place a responsible father would bring his child to live. But responsibility had become a luxury Daniel could no longer afford. The math was devastatingly simple. $350 for the building versus $900 a month for the mold-infested trailer they'd been calling home. The mill had walls and most of a roof. That made it a palace compared to the alternative, which was Daniel's Ford pickup with 200,000 miles and a check engine light that never turned off. "It's just old," Daniel said, forcing confidence into his voice he didn't remotely feel. "Old doesn't mean bad. Old means they built it to last. Things were made different back then." Lucas looked up at him with eyes that held far too much understanding for 9 years old. He'd developed that look over the past 3 years, ever since his mother, Jennifer, had overdosed in a motel bathroom 2 parishes over. No warning, no goodbye. Just a phone call from a sheriff's deputy and a body Daniel had to identify while Lucas waited in a social worker's office, drawing pictures that would later require therapy to understand. Some losses don't heal. They just become part of who you are. The bank clerk had given Daniel a single key, heavy brass worn smooth by generations of use. It felt like an anchor in his palm as he approached the main entrance, a massive steel door that hung crooked on hinges thick with rust and salt corrosion. The key slid into the lock with surprising ease, and the door groaned open, revealing a cavernous darkness beyond. The interior smelled of motor oil, rotting wood, and something sweet and sickly that Daniel suspected was decades of crystallized sugar mixed with mildew and decay. What little October light filtered through the filthy windows revealed a vast processing floor filled with silent machinery. Enormous vats, conveyor systems, and crushing equipment stood frozen in mid-operation, as if the workers had simply walked away one shift and never returned, which Daniel suspected was probably exactly what had happened. Lucas stayed close as they explored, their footsteps echoing on concrete floors sticky with residue. The main refining area occupied most of the ground level, cathedral ceilings lost in shadows above. Metal stairs led to a second floor where offices had once operated, their doors hanging open to reveal rooms filled with overturned filing cabinets and desks buried under years of paperwork gone soft with humidity. "Can we really live here?" Lucas asked quietly, his voice swallowed by the massive space. Daniel surveyed their new home with what he hoped resembled optimism. "We'll make it work, buddy. See that office up there? The one with the window facing east? We'll clean it out, set up our beds. I'll rig up some power, get water running. It'll be like camping." "I don't want to camp anymore," Lucas said softly. The words landed like a fist to Daniel's chest. Lucas used to love camping. Before Jennifer died, before the rig job ended, before their life became a series of increasingly desperate compromises, Lucas had been fearless. He'd caught crawfish in ditches, climbed trees despite Daniel's protests, invented elaborate games involving pirates and buried treasure. Now he flinched at new places, clung to routine, and looked at the world through eyes that expected disappointment. Daniel knelt to his son's level, his knees protesting against the hard concrete. "I know things have been rough. I know you didn't ask for any of this. But I promise you, we're going to be okay. This place might look scary now, but it's ours. Nobody can kick us out. Nobody can raise the rent. We just need to make it livable." Lucas studied his face with that heartbreaking perception. "You promise?" Daniel had learned the brutal way that promises to children carried weight you couldn't always bear. But what else did he have to offer? "I promise we'll try our hardest. That's all I can give you." Lucas seemed to accept it, nodding slightly before turning his attention back to exploring their strange new home. They spent the remaining daylight hours doing reconnaissance. Daniel tested light switches, finding to his surprise that electricity still flowed to the building, though several fixtures had long since burned out. The plumbing proved more complicated. Water ran when he cranked open a rusted valve in what had been the facility's bathroom, but it flowed brown for several long minutes before clearing to something resembling clean. The toilet functioned after some aggressive plunging, which Daniel counted as a significant victory. The upper floors revealed more offices, a break room with a refrigerator that had become a biology experiment, and storage areas packed with boxes of deteriorating paperwork and supplies. Daniel made mental notes of what could be salvaged. Cleaning supplies, some basic tools, even a few folding chairs that might be usable once sanitized. As the sun began its descent toward the cypress swamps west of the property, Daniel started hauling their possessions from the truck. They didn't have much. 2 duffel bags of clothes, a box of Lucas's toys and books, Daniel's tool bag, sleeping bags and blankets, a portable camp stove, and a cooler with the perishable food they'd managed to save from the trailer. 3 trips to get everything inside, each one emphasizing just how little they'd accumulated in 9 years of Lucas's life. He chose the largest office on the 2nd floor for their living space. It had windows facing east that would catch morning light, and a door that still closed properly, offering at least the illusion of privacy. Daniel swept out the worst of the debris and dust, then laid out their sleeping bags on the floor. The camp stove went in one corner, food supplies in another. Lucas arranged his toys on the windowsill with careful precision, creating order in chaos. "It's like camping," Daniel offered, watching his son organize his small world. "Camping is supposed to be temporary," Lucas replied without looking up. Daniel had no response to that. Instead, he focused on practical tasks. Heat wouldn't be an issue in Louisiana October, but water would be. He needed to verify the plumbing throughout the building, identify which pipes still functioned and which had corroded beyond use. Tomorrow he'd investigate the electrical system more thoroughly, make sure nothing was going to catch fire the moment they turned on too many lights. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They ate dinner sitting on the floor of their new room. Sandwiches made from supplies Daniel had grabbed at a gas station on the drive down. Lucas chewed slowly, his eyes wandering the bare office walls. Outside, twilight turned the windows into dark mirrors that reflected the single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. "Tell me about Mom," Lucas said suddenly. The request caught Daniel off guard. Lucas rarely asked about Jennifer anymore. The first year after her death, he'd asked constantly. Where was she? Was she coming back? Did she love them? Daniel had fumbled through explanations that satisfied neither of them, eventually settling on variations of Mom was sick and it's complicated. After a while, Lucas stopped asking. Daniel had thought that meant acceptance. Now he wondered if it had just been retreat. "What do you want to know?" Daniel asked carefully. Lucas picked at his sandwich. "Do you think she meant to leave us?" Daniel had wrestled with this question for 3 years. Jennifer's death had been ruled accidental, an overdose of painkillers she'd been prescribed after a car accident. But Daniel knew the signs he'd missed. The way she'd started taking more than prescribed. The doctor shopping. The late-night drives to pick up prescriptions from pharmacies 3 towns over. He'd convinced himself it was just pain management, that she had it under control, that confronting her would only make things worse. And then a motel maid found her body and Daniel's world collapsed into before and after. "I think Mom was in a lot of pain," Daniel said carefully, choosing words like walking through a minefield. Not just her back from the accident. Pain in her heart, in her head. Sometimes that kind of pain makes people do things they wouldn't do otherwise. "I don't think she wanted to leave us. I think she just wanted the pain to stop." Lucas absorbed this quietly. "Do you miss her?" "Every day," Daniel said honestly. "Even though I'm angry at her sometimes. Even though I wish she'd made different choices. I still miss her." "Me too," Lucas whispered. They finished dinner in heavy silence. Daniel cleaned up their minimal dishes while Lucas prepared for bed, changing into his pajamas and brushing his teeth in the questionable bathroom down the hall. When he returned, Daniel tucked him into his sleeping bag and read to him from one of the books they'd brought, a battered copy of Hatchet that had been Lucas's favorite before everything changed. Lucas fell asleep halfway through the chapter, his breathing settling into the deep rhythm of childhood exhaustion. Daniel continued reading softly for a few more minutes, reluctant to abandon this small piece of normalcy. Finally, he closed the book and simply sat there, watching his sons sleep in their strange new home. The sugar mill made sounds at night. Metal creaking, wood groaning, wind whistling through gaps in the walls. Normal sounds for an old building, Daniel told himself, even as they raised every hair on the back of his neck. He'd grown up in suburbs and apartments, not sprawling industrial ruins. The sheer size of the place, the echoing spaces below, the shadows that pressed against their small island of light, all of it felt overwhelming in the darkness. Daniel checked the camp stove to ensure it was properly shut off, then settled into his own sleeping bag. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by unfamiliar sounds and the hard floor beneath him. At some point in the early morning hours, exhaustion finally won. He woke to pale light filtering through dirty windows and Lucas already awake, sitting cross-legged on his sleeping bag, drawing in his notebook. Daniel had bought him that notebook and a pack of colored pencils 4 months ago, back when he'd still had steady work. Lucas had filled half of it already with elaborate drawings of places that looked nothing like their actual life. Castles, spaceships, underwater cities. Anywhere but here. "Morning, buddy," Daniel said, his voice rough from sleep and dry air. "Morning," Lucas replied without looking up. "This place makes weird sounds at night. Old buildings do that. It's just the metal expanding and contracting with temperature changes. Nothing to worry about." Lucas nodded but didn't look convinced. Daniel couldn't blame him. In daylight, the mill looked less menacing but no more welcoming. Just old, vast, and fundamentally empty. Daniel made them a basic breakfast on the camp stove. Instant oatmeal and coffee for himself. As they ate, he outlined his plan for the day. First priority was thoroughly inspecting the building's structural integrity. If the roof was compromised or the floors unsafe, they'd need to know before someone got hurt. Second priority was making their living space more habitable. Deep cleaning, finding or improvising furniture, maybe rigging up some kind of shower system. "Can I explore while you work?" Lucas asked. Daniel hesitated. The mill was large and potentially dangerous with its old machinery and questionable structural integrity. But keeping Lucas confined to one office seemed cruel, and he couldn't watch him constantly while trying to assess the building. "You can explore the second floor," Daniel compromised. "But stay away from the machinery downstairs, and stay where I can hear you if you call. Deal?" "Deal," Lucas agreed readily. They spent the morning in parallel tasks. Daniel descended to the basement level, a dark warren beneath the main processing floor accessed by a narrow staircase that groaned alarmingly under his weight. The space was a maze of pipes, electrical conduits, and storage tanks, everything coated in a thick layer of dust and crystallized sugar. He was examining what appeared to be the main water shutoff when Lucas's voice cut through the building with unusual urgency. "Dad! Dad, come quick!" Daniel was up those stairs faster than he thought possible, heart hammering. Lucas's tone hadn't been panic exactly, but something close. He found his son standing in a narrow hallway at the far end of the second floor, an area Daniel hadn't thoroughly explored yet. "What's wrong?" Daniel asked, scanning for danger. "Nothing's wrong," Lucas said, his eyes bright with excitement that Daniel hadn't seen in months. "But look at this." Lucas pointed to what appeared to be solid wall, concrete painted industrial gray, identical to every other wall in the building. But when Daniel looked closer, he noticed something odd. A hairline crack running vertically for about 6 feet, too straight to be natural settling. "I was leaning against it," Lucas explained, "and it moved a little. Like it's not really a wall." Daniel ran his fingers along the crack, finding the edge of what felt like a door disguised to blend seamlessly with the surrounding wall. He pressed against it experimentally, and with a soft click, a section of wall swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing darkness beyond. "Stay here," Daniel instructed Lucas, pulling out his phone and activating the flashlight. The beam revealed a narrow staircase descending into darkness, concrete steps leading down into what should have been solid earth. Daniel's pulse quickened. This wasn't a hidden office or storage room. This was something else entirely. "What is it?" Lucas called from the doorway. "I don't know yet," Daniel said, his voice tight. "Stay there. I mean it." He descended the stairs slowly, phone light sweeping back and forth. The staircase dropped approximately 15 feet before opening into a tunnel. Not a basement, not a storage cellar. A tunnel. Roughly 8 feet high and 6 feet wide, carved through the earth and reinforced with timber supports and corrugated metal sheeting. The floor was packed dirt, and the air smelled of dampness and something chemical Daniel couldn't identify. The tunnel extended in both directions beyond the reach of his phone light. Daniel's mind raced through possibilities. Smuggling operation. Prohibition era maybe, though the construction looked more recent. Or something else entirely. He took a few steps into the tunnel, his light catching on details. Fresh-looking tire tracks in the dirt floor. Modern LED light fixtures mounted to the ceiling, currently off. Electrical conduit running along one wall. This tunnel had been used recently. Very recently. Daniel's stomach dropped as understanding began to dawn. The foreclosure on the mill. The impossibly low price. The fact that no one local had touched the property for 2 decades despite Louisiana real estate being generally affordable. Everyone knew something Daniel hadn't. He backed toward the stairs, urgency replacing curiosity. They needed to leave. Right now. Whatever this tunnel was, whoever had built it, Daniel and Lucas had just stumbled into something far beyond unpaid rent and desperate housing solutions. He emerged from the hidden door to find Lucas exactly where he'd left him, vibrating with curiosity. "What's down there? Is it treasure?" "It's a tunnel," Daniel said, his voice tight as he pulled out his phone. "And we need to make some calls." "What kind of tunnel?" "The kind that means we probably shouldn't be here," Daniel said, already dialing 911. The dispatcher answered on the second ring, her voice professionally calm. 911, what's your emergency?" "My name is Daniel Reeves. I just purchased the old Cortez Sugar Mill off Highway 41. I found a hidden tunnel under the building. It looks recently used. I think you need to send someone out here." There was a pause. "A tunnel, sir?" "Yes. A large tunnel. Underground. With fresh tire tracks and electrical wiring. I don't know where it goes, but it's definitely not supposed to be here." Another pause, longer this time. "Stay on the line, sir. I'm connecting you to the sheriff's department." The transfer took less than 30 seconds. A gruff voice came on the line. "This is Sheriff Boudreaux." "You found what now?" Daniel explained again, keeping his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. The sheriff's questions came rapid fire. Exactly where was the entrance? How far did the tunnel extend? Had Daniel seen anyone else on the property? Had he noticed any vehicles nearby? No, Daniel answered to the last two questions. We just got here yesterday. The place has been abandoned for years. Stay where you are, the sheriff said. Don't go back into that tunnel. Don't touch anything. We're sending units now. Should be there in 15 minutes. The sheriff hung up. Daniel looked down at Lucas, who was watching him with wide eyes. Are we in trouble? Lucas asked quietly. No, buddy. We're not in trouble. But we found something important, and the police need to see it. 15 minutes turned into 12. 3 sheriff's department vehicles arrived first, lights flashing but no sirens. Sheriff Boudreau emerged from the lead vehicle, a broad-shouldered man in his 60s with the weathered face of someone who'd spent his entire life in Louisiana sun. He approached Daniel with a hand resting casually on his service weapon. Mr. Reeves? Show me this tunnel. Daniel led him inside, Lucas trailing behind despite Daniel's instruction to wait by the truck. The sheriff examined the hidden door with practiced eyes, then descended the stairs with his own flashlight, much more powerful than Daniel's phone. He was down there for perhaps 5 minutes before emerging, his expression grim. He pulled out his radio. This is Boudreau. Contact DEA and FBI. We've got a major situation at the old Cortez mill. Looks like a drug tunnel, active construction. I need the property secured immediately. Within an hour, the mill was surrounded by law enforcement. More sheriff's deputies, Louisiana State Police, and eventually federal agents in suits too formal for the Louisiana heat. They descended on the property like an invading force, cordoning off the building with yellow tape, establishing a perimeter, bringing in equipment Daniel didn't recognize. A federal agent in his 40s approached Daniel where he sat with Lucas in the back of his truck, trying to explain what was happening in terms a 9-year-old could process. The agent's badge identified him as Special Agent Marcus Kellerman, FBI. Mr. Reeves, we need to ask you some questions. But first, I need to be clear. You're not in any trouble. You've actually done us a significant service by reporting this. What is it? Daniel asked. The tunnel? Kellerman glanced at Lucas, then back to Daniel. Can we talk privately? Daniel looked at his son, then back to the agent. Whatever you need to tell me, he can hear. I don't keep secrets from him. Kellerman nodded slowly. Fair enough. That tunnel appears to be part of a drug trafficking operation. Based on the construction and location, we believe it connects to a network used by a Mexican cartel to move product across the parish. Probably been operational for at least 2 years, maybe longer. Daniel felt the world tilt slightly. A cartel. He'd bought a building being used by a cartel. The mill's been abandoned for decades, Daniel said. How did no one know? These operations are sophisticated, Kellerman explained. They often use abandoned buildings specifically because no one's paying attention. The tunnel entrance could be accessed from outside the building through another concealed entry point. They may have never actually entered the mill itself. But I own it now, Daniel said, the implications crashing over him. I legally purchased this property. You did, Kellerman confirmed. Which is why we need your cooperation. We're going to need to search the entire building thoroughly. We'll also need to monitor the tunnel to see if anyone attempts to use it. With your permission, we'd like to set up surveillance equipment on your property. Daniel laughed, a sound without humor. My property. I own it for 2 days and it's already a crime scene. Kellerman's expression softened slightly. I understand this isn't what you expected. But you've stumbled onto something significant here. If we can use this to track and arrest the people operating this tunnel, we could dismantle a major trafficking route. And what happens to us? Daniel asked. Where are Lucas and I supposed to go? This is all we have. Kellerman was quiet for a moment. Let me make some calls. Give me an hour. The hour stretched into 3. Daniel and Lucas sat in the truck, watching law enforcement swarm over the property they'd slept in just the night before. Lucas had stopped asking questions, retreating into the quiet watchfulness that meant he was processing more than he could articulate. Finally, Kellerman returned, accompanied by a woman in her 30s wearing a sheriff's department uniform. "This is Deputy Chin," he said. "She's going to take you and your son to a motel in town. Federal government will cover the cost while we process the scene." "For how long?" Daniel asked. "At least a few days," Kellerman said. "Maybe longer. We need to thoroughly search the building and set up monitoring equipment. After that, we'll reassess the situation." "And then what?" Daniel pressed. "Do I get to live in my own building, or is this going to be an active investigation site indefinitely?" Kellerman met his eyes. "Honestly, I don't know yet. But I promise you, we'll figure something out. You did the right thing calling us. That counts for something." Deputy Chin drove them to a motel on the outskirts of the parish, a place that had probably been nice in the 1980s but now served primarily as affordable short-term housing for workers and families in transition. She handed Daniel a card with a number for victim services and told him someone would contact him the next day. The room had 2 beds, a bathroom that was cleaner than the mills, and a television that got basic cable. Lucas immediately claimed the bed nearest the window and turned on the TV, finding a cartoon he'd seen a dozen times before. The familiar comfort of it. Daniel sat on the other bed, staring at the card Deputy Chin had given him. Victim services. He wasn't a victim. He was just a guy who'd made a terrible decision based on incomplete information, which was basically the story of his entire adult life. His phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him. "Mr. Reeves?" A woman's voice, professional and clipped. "My name is Victoria Hensley. I'm an attorney with the public defender's office in the parish. I understand you've had an unusual day." "That's one way to put it," Daniel said. "I'd like to meet with you tomorrow if possible. Discuss your legal situation and potential options moving forward." "I'm not under arrest," Daniel said. "No," Victoria agreed. "But you're in a complicated position. You own a property that's now part of an active federal investigation. There may be civil forfeiture issues, zoning complications, even potential liability depending on what else they find. You need someone in your corner who understands the system." "I can't afford a lawyer," Daniel said flatly. "I'm aware. That's why I'm calling. I work with the public defender's office, but I also do some advocacy work for families dealing with housing and property issues. I'd like to help if you'll let me." Daniel looked at Lucas, absorbed in his cartoon, temporarily safe from the chaos swirling around them. "Why?" he asked. "Why do you want to help?" "Because from what I understand, you did exactly what you were supposed to do. You found something illegal, and you reported it. The system shouldn't punish you for that. Unfortunately, sometimes it does anyway. I'd like to make sure that doesn't happen here." Daniel closed his eyes. "Okay. Yeah. I could use the help." They arranged to meet the next morning at a coffee shop in town. Daniel hung up and stared at the motel room's ceiling, water-stained and yellowed with age. 72 hours ago, he thought buying a condemned sugar mill for $350 was rock bottom. Now he realized rock bottom had levels he hadn't imagined. And somewhere far below, in a tunnel he'd discovered by accident, other people's crimes were about to become his problem in ways he was only beginning to understand. Lucas laughed at something on the television, a pure sound of childhood joy that cut through Daniel's spiraling thoughts. At least his son was safe tonight. Warm, fed, and temporarily sheltered. Everything else, Daniel would figure out tomorrow. He had to believe that, because the alternative was admitting that this time, he'd made a mistake that couldn't be fixed with hard work and good intentions. Outside, night fell over the Louisiana lowlands, thick and humid. And back at the mill, in the darkness beneath the earth, a tunnel waited to reveal secrets that would change everything Daniel thought he knew about survival, legacy, and what it means to own something that was never really yours to claim. Victoria Hensley arrived at the coffee shop wearing jeans and a blazer that had seen better days, her dark hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. She ordered black coffee and sat across from Daniel in a booth near the back, pulling out a legal pad covered in handwritten notes. "I've been reviewing your case since we spoke last night," she said without preamble. "The situation is more complex than I initially thought, but not hopeless." Daniel had left Lucas at the motel with a neighbor woman Deputy Chin had recommended, someone who ran an informal childcare service for families in crisis. He'd hated leaving his son, but some conversations needed to happen without 9-year-old ears absorbing details they couldn't process. "Complex how?" Daniel asked. Victoria tapped her pen against the legal pad. "The property you purchased is now designated as an active crime scene and potential evidence in a federal investigation. The FBI has the authority to restrict access indefinitely while they conduct surveillance and potentially use the tunnel to track cartel operations. You still own the building legally, but you may not be able to occupy it for months, possibly longer." Daniel felt something crack inside his chest. "That's everything I have. I spent my last $350 on that property." "I know," Victoria said, and her voice carried genuine sympathy. "Which is why we need to explore every option. First, we file for emergency housing assistance through the state. Your situation qualifies. Second, we petition the federal government for compensation for the use of your property. They're essentially commandeering it for law enforcement purposes. You're entitled to fair market value rent at minimum." "Fair market value for an abandoned sugar mill?" Daniel said bitterly. "That's probably $50 a month." "Actually," Victoria said, "once it's designated as an active law enforcement facility, the valuation changes significantly. We could argue for several thousand a month, especially if their surveillance operation extends beyond a few weeks." Daniel stared at her. "You're serious?" "Completely. The government doesn't get to use private property without compensation. That's constitutional law. The problem is getting them to acknowledge it without a lengthy court battle." "And how long would that take?" Victoria grimaced. 6 months to a year if we're lucky. Longer if they fight it." Daniel put his head in his hands. "I don't have 6 months. I don't have 6 weeks. I need a place for my son to live now. Which is why we're also pursuing the emergency housing assistance," Victoria said firmly. "I've already put in the application. Given your circumstances, eviction from your previous residence, dependent child, good faith purchase of property now unusable due to federal action, you should qualify for expedited processing." "Should," Daniel repeated. "Will," Victoria corrected. "I'll make sure of it. I've worked with the housing authority for years. They know me. They know I don't file frivolous applications." They sat in silence for a moment. The coffee shop around them buzzed with morning activity, people grabbing breakfast before work, living normal lives untouched by drug tunnels and federal investigations. "There's something else," Victoria said quietly. "Something you need to understand about the Cortez mill and why it was abandoned in the first place." Daniel looked up. "I assumed the sugar industry just collapsed. Cheap imports, changing markets." "That was part of it," Victoria agreed. "But there's local history you weren't told. The Cortez family owned that mill for 3 generations. Built it in the late 40s, ran it successfully through the 70s. Then Rafael Cortez, the founder's grandson, got involved with some questionable business partners. Started using the mill's legitimate operations to launder money from drug trafficking." Daniel's blood went cold. "This has happened before." "In the 80s and 90s, Victoria confirmed. Rafael was eventually arrested and convicted, served 15 years in federal prison. The mill was seized under civil forfeiture laws, held by the government for years during appeals, then eventually sold at auction. It went through several owners after that, but the property was tainted. Everyone local knew its history. Most people stayed away. And the bank didn't think to mention this when I bought it?" Daniel said, anger rising in his voice. "The foreclosure sale was as is," Victoria said. "No warranty, no disclosure requirements beyond basic structural hazards. They weren't legally obligated to tell you about the property's criminal history. But they knew, Daniel said. They had to know. And they sold it to someone desperate enough not to ask questions. Victoria didn't disagree. Which is another angle we can pursue. Fraud by omission, failure to disclose material facts. It's not a strong case, but it's something. Daniel's phone buzzed. A text from the neighbor watching Lucas. He's asking when you're coming back. Everything okay, but he's worried. Daniel typed a quick response, then looked at Victoria. What would you do? If you were in my position? Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Honestly? I'd be terrified. You've got a 9-year-old son, no job, no home, and you're caught in the middle of something that could take years to resolve. But here's what I know about people in your situation. The ones who survive are the ones who make one decision at a time and don't let the bigger picture paralyze them. Right now, today, your decision is whether to trust me to help you navigate this. Everything else comes after. Daniel met her eyes. He'd become good at reading people over the years, a skill developed through necessity. Victoria wasn't offering false hope or empty promises. She was offering competence and commitment, which was more than anyone else had given him in a long time. Okay, he said. Tell me what to do. The emergency housing assistance came through faster than Victoria had predicted. Within 48 hours, Daniel and Lucas were moved from the motel to a subsidized apartment in a complex 20 minutes from town. 2 bedrooms, functioning kitchen and bathroom, furniture that was worn but clean. It felt like luxury after sleeping on the floor of the sugar mill. Lucas adapted with the resilience of childhood, claiming the smaller bedroom and immediately arranging his toys with the same careful precision he'd shown at every new place they'd landed. Daniel watched his son create order from chaos and felt the familiar ache of inadequacy. 9 years old and already an expert at starting over. Special Agent Kellerman visited on their 3rd day in the apartment, bringing pizza and an update Daniel wasn't sure he wanted to hear. We've been monitoring the tunnel, Kellerman said as they sat around the small dining table. It connects to a warehouse complex about 2 miles south of your property. The tunnel's part of a larger network, probably cost millions to construct. Whoever built it invested serious resources. Have you caught anyone using it? Daniel asked. Not yet, Kellerman admitted. We think they know something's wrong. They may have surveillance of their own, cameras we haven't found yet. The operation's gone quiet. So what happens now? We wait, Kellerman said. These organizations are patient. They'll eventually test the route again, see if it's still secure. When they do, we'll be ready. And how long could that take? Months potentially, Kellerman said. Maybe longer. Daniel felt Lucas tense beside him. His son had been eating pizza quietly, but Daniel could feel the anxiety radiating from him. Lucas had become hypersensitive to uncertainty, to open-ended timelines that promised nothing. So we just wait, Daniel said flatly. Wait for criminals to maybe use a tunnel under a building I legally own but can't access. And in the meantime, what? I'm supposed to find a new job, build a new life, pretend this is sustainable? Kellerman's expression was sympathetic but firm. I understand your frustration, Mr. Reeves. I do. But you're part of a federal investigation now. That comes with complications. I didn't ask to be part of anything, Daniel said, his voice rising. I bought a building. That's it. I was trying to give my son a roof over his head. And you did the right thing by reporting what you found, Kellerman said. That counts for something. Does it? Daniel asked. Because from where I'm sitting, doing the right thing has cost me everything I had and left me dependent on government assistance and the goodwill of strangers. Dad, Lucas said quietly. It's okay. It's not okay, Daniel said, but he lowered his voice, recognizing his son's attempt to defuse the situation. None of this is okay. Kellerman stood, leaving his business card on the table. Call me if you need anything. I mean that. And Mr. Reeves? The government compensation Victoria mentioned? I'm going to personally make sure that gets processed. You shouldn't have to wait months for it. After Kellerman left, Daniel sat staring at the half-eaten pizza, his appetite gone. Lucas picked at his slice, not eating, just rearranging the pepperoni. Are we going to be okay? Lucas asked finally. Daniel wanted to say yes. Wanted to promise that everything would work out, that this was just a temporary setback, that their lives would stabilize. But he'd made too many promises he couldn't keep. I don't know, buddy, Daniel said honestly. But we're going to try. 2 weeks passed in uncomfortable limbo. Daniel applied for jobs, but the parish's economy was depressed, positions scarce. The offshore rigs weren't hiring. Construction work had dried up with the season. He took a part-time position at a hardware store, minimum wage and irregular hours, but it was something. Lucas started at a new school, his 4th in 3 years. Daniel watched his son become increasingly withdrawn, retreating into silence during dinner, spending hours drawing in his notebook instead of talking about his day. The resilience Daniel had admired was beginning to look more like resignation, and that terrified him more than any federal investigation. Victoria called one evening while Daniel was making dinner, boxed macaroni and cheese that Lucas had stopped pretending to enjoy. I have news, she said. The federal government has agreed to compensation for the use of your property. $1,500 a month, retroactive to the date of discovery. Daniel nearly dropped the phone. $1,500? It's not a fortune, Victoria said, but it's something. More importantly, it's acknowledgement that they owe you for commandeering your property. That sets precedent for future negotiations. How long will they pay it? As long as the investigation remains active, Victoria said. Could be months. Could be longer. Daniel did quick math. $1,500 a month would cover rent on the subsidized apartment with money left over for food and basic necessities. It wouldn't rebuild his life, but it would stabilize it. There's a catch, Victoria continued. They want you to sign a non-disclosure agreement. You can't talk to media about the tunnel, the investigation, or your involvement. Any breach of the NDA terminates the compensation immediately and could result in obstruction charges. Daniel understood. They were buying his silence, making sure he didn't become a complication or a headline. Part of him wanted to refuse on principle, but principle didn't feed his son or keep a roof over their heads. I'll sign, Daniel said. The money started flowing the following week, direct deposit to a bank account Victoria helped him establish. For the first time in months, Daniel could breathe without calculating whether he had enough for groceries and gas. Lucas noticed the change immediately, the way tension Daniel hadn't realized he was carrying began to ease. But the investigation dragged on. Weeks turned into months. Kellerman's promised break in the case never materialized. The tunnel remained silent, the cartel apparently abandoning it rather than risk exposure. Daniel collected his monthly compensation and tried to build something resembling a normal life. Lucas turned 10 in February. Daniel threw him a small party at the apartment, inviting a few kids from school Lucas had mentioned in passing. They came, ate cake, played games, and left. Afterward, Lucas sat on his bed, staring at the drawing he'd been working on for weeks. What is it? Daniel asked, looking at the elaborate sketch. It showed a building, not the sugar mill, but something else. A house with a porch, surrounded by trees, detailed and hopeful. It's where I want to live someday, Lucas said quietly. Somewhere that's actually ours. Not a mill with tunnels, not an apartment we're borrowing. Just ours. The words cut deep. Daniel had been so focused on survival that he'd lost sight of what Lucas actually needed. Not just shelter, but permanence. Not just stability, but home. That night, after Lucas was asleep, Daniel called Victoria. I want to sell the mill, he said. Whatever it takes, whatever legal complications. I want out. Victoria was quiet for a moment. That's going to be complicated. The property's still part of an active investigation. The FBI has equipment installed. You can't sell it without government approval, and they're not likely to give that while the operation's ongoing. Then I want to sue, Daniel said. Sue the bank for fraud, sue the federal government for taking too long, sue whoever I need to sue to get my life back. Victoria sighed. Daniel, I understand your frustration. But lawsuits take years and cost money you don't have. Even if you won, which is far from certain, you'd spend years in litigation. Is that really what you want? I want my son to have a home, Daniel said. A real home. Not this endless waiting for someone else to decide when we get to move forward. Then let's try a different approach, Victoria said. Give me a week. Let me make some calls, explore some options. Don't do anything rash yet. Daniel agreed, but the conversation shifted something inside him. He'd been passive for months, accepting what was given, grateful for small mercies. But Lucas deserved more than that. Deserved a father who fought, not just survived. The call came from Kellerman 3 days later. We need you to come to the mill, he said. There's been a development. Daniel arranged for the neighbor to watch Lucas and drove out to the property for the first time in months. The mill looked different, more secure. Chain-link fencing surrounded it. Security cameras were visible on the exterior. FBI vehicles were parked in what used to be the lot where Daniel had first stood with his son, contemplating their desperate gamble. Kellerman met him at the gate. We caught someone, he said without preamble. Last night, someone tried to access the tunnel from the warehouse end. We arrested them. That's good, right? Daniel said. It's progress, Kellerman agreed. But here's the situation. The individual we arrested is willing to cooperate. They're providing information about the cartel's operations in exchange for a reduced sentence. Part of that cooperation involves confirming that the tunnel network is larger than we initially thought. Your property sits on top of just one branch. Daniel felt cold despite the humid Louisiana air. How much larger? The tunnel system apparently extends under at least 6 other properties in the parish, Kellerman said. Multiple entry points, multiple warehouses. Your mill was just one node in a much bigger network. And you're telling me this because? Because the investigation is going to expand significantly, Kellerman said. We're going to need access to your property for potentially years, not months. The compensation agreement will continue, but I wanted you to hear it directly from me. This isn't ending anytime soon. Daniel stared at the mill, the building he'd bought for $350, thinking it would save him. Instead, it had trapped him in a limbo he couldn't escape. I want to go inside, Daniel said suddenly. That's not possible, Kellerman said. It's an active investigation site. It's my property, Daniel said, his voice hard. You're paying me rent for it. I have a right to inspect it. Kellerman studied him for a long moment. 10 minutes, he said finally. Supervised. Don't touch anything. They walked through the mill together. The main processing floor looked largely the same, machinery still frozen in place, but now with federal equipment installed throughout. Cameras, sensors, monitoring stations. The building had been transformed into a surveillance hub. Daniel climbed the stairs to the second floor, Kellerman following. Their old office, the room where he and Lucas had slept on the floor, had been converted into a command center. Computers, communications equipment, cables running everywhere. This was supposed to be home, Daniel said quietly. For about 12 hours, this was where we were going to rebuild our lives. I'm sorry, Kellerman said, and he sounded like he meant it. I know that doesn't help, but I am. Daniel looked out the window at the overgrown field surrounding the mill. Lucas had asked him once whether the land remembered what happened on it. Standing here now, Daniel wondered if that was true. If somehow the soil held memory of Rafael Cortez's crimes, of the cartel tunnel carved beneath it, of a desperate father's failed gamble. When he returned to the apartment that evening, Lucas was drawing again. Another building, another imaginary home. Daniel sat beside his son on the bed, looking at the careful details. Windows with curtains, A door painted blue, a mailbox with a name on it. Is that our name? Daniel asked, pointing to the mailbox. Lucas nodded. Someday, he said. When we have a real place. Daniel pulled his son close, feeling the weight of all his failures pressing down. But also feeling something else. Determination maybe, or just stubborn refusal to accept that this was how their story ended. Victoria called the next morning with news that changed everything. I found something, she said, excitement evident in her voice. The bank that sold you the mill? They had prior knowledge of the property's criminal history. Not just general knowledge, specific documentation. Internal memos discussing whether to disclose it to potential buyers. They made a conscious decision not to. That's fraud, Daniel said. That's fraud, Victoria confirmed. Actionable, provable fraud. We can sue, and we can win. More importantly, we can use it as leverage to force a buyback. Make them take the property back and refund your purchase price plus damages for your losses. Daniel's heart raced. How much in damages? Depends on how we calculate it, Victoria said. Loss of housing, emotional distress to you and your son, the months of limbo you've endured. I'd argue for at least 50,000, possibly more. 50,000 would change everything. Would give Daniel the ability to actually choose where they lived instead of accepting whatever assistance provided. Would give Lucas the stability he desperately needed. Do it, Daniel said. Whatever you need from me, do it. The lawsuit was filed within the week. The bank's response was immediate and aggressive, a team of corporate lawyers arguing that Daniel had purchased the property as is, that no fraud had occurred, that any claims of damages were speculative and excessive. But Victoria had the internal memos, the smoking gun that proved deliberate concealment. The bank's lawyers knew it. Within a month, they requested mediation. The mediation took place in a conference room at the parish courthouse. Daniel sat across from 3 bank representatives and their lawyers, Victoria beside him, legal pad covered in notes. A court-appointed mediator, a retired judge with the weathered patience of someone who'd seen every angle of human conflict, sat at the head of the table. The bank's lead attorney opened with an offer of $20,000 in return of the property. Take it or leave it, his tone suggested. Victoria didn't hesitate. We'll leave it. And we'll see you in court where a jury will hear how your client deliberately sold contaminated property to a desperate single father, knowing it would destroy what little stability he'd managed to create for his son. The attorney's expression tightened. The property wasn't contaminated when sold. The tunnel was discovered afterward. The tunnel that had been there for years, Victoria countered. The tunnel your client's own documents indicate they suspected existed based on the property's history. You knew the risk, and you sold anyway without disclosure. Back and forth they went. 50,000. 35. 40. The bank wouldn't budge higher. Victoria held firm. The mediator called brakes, met with each side separately, tried to find middle ground. Finally, after 6 hours, the mediator addressed Daniel directly. Mr. Reeves, I want you to understand something. If you take this to trial, you might win more than 40,000. You might also lose and walk away with nothing. Litigation is expensive and unpredictable. The offer on the table right now, 40,000 plus return of your original $350, that's guaranteed money. Life-changing money for someone in your situation. I can't tell you what to decide, but I can tell you that certainty has value. Daniel looked at Victoria. What do you think? I think you could get more if we fight, Victoria said honestly. I also think the judge is right about the risk. This is real money, right now. It would give you options. Daniel thought about Lucas. Thought about the drawing of a house with a blue door and their name on the mailbox. Thought about years of litigation versus the ability to actually move forward today. I'll take it, Daniel said. The settlement was finalized within 2 weeks. $40,350, minus Victoria's contingency fee of 30%, left Daniel with just over $28,000. More money than he'd ever had at one time in his life. He sat Lucas down that evening and explained what it meant. "We're going to find a real home," he told his son. "Something small, something we can actually afford. But it'll be ours. No tunnels, no investigations, no waiting for someone else to decide our future." Lucas looked at him with those two old eyes. Promise? Daniel had learned to be careful with promises. But this one, he could make. "I promise we'll try. And this time, we actually have the resources to make it work." They spent the next month looking at properties. Small houses in need of work, mobile homes on leased land, a converted garage apartment. Nothing perfect, but everything a step up from limbo. Then Victoria called with one more surprise. "The FBI wants to buy the mill from you outright," she said. "They're offering $60,000, contingent on you signing an expanded NDA and agreeing to vacate any claim to future compensation." Daniel did the math. 60,000 plus the 28,000 from the settlement. 88,000 total. Enough for a down payment on an actual house. Enough to start over with real foundation. "Why so much?" Daniel asked. "Because they don't want complications," Victoria said. "They want clean ownership, no potential liability issues down the road. And honestly, because Kellerman went to bat for you. Convinced his superiors that you deserved fair treatment." Daniel thought about the FBI agent who'd brought pizza and made promises he'd actually kept. "Tell them yes," he said. The closing happened on a Thursday in late spring. Daniel signed papers transferring ownership of the Cortez Sugar Mill to the federal government, received a cashier's check for $60,000, and walked out of the title company's office feeling lighter than he had in over a year. That weekend, he and Lucas looked at a house. Small, 2 bedrooms, in a neighborhood that had seen better days but still had families and functioning schools. The yard needed work, the roof would need replacing eventually, the kitchen was 30 years out of date. But it had a porch. And when Daniel asked Lucas what color they should paint the front door, his son answered immediately. "Blue," Lucas said. "Paint it blue." They moved in 6 weeks later, all their possessions fitting in Daniel's truck in a single trip. Lucas claimed the smaller bedroom again, but this time he unpacked his toys and arranged them on permanent shelves Daniel had installed. No careful precision designed for quick packing. Just the natural chaos of a child making a space truly his own. That night, after Lucas was asleep, Daniel sat on the porch in the humid Louisiana darkness. Cicadas sang in the trees. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. Normal sounds of a normal neighborhood. He thought about the sugar mill. Wondered if the FBI had caught anyone else using the tunnel. Wondered if Rafael Cortez, wherever he was, knew that his family's legacy had repeated itself. Wondered if the land really did remember, if somehow the soil held onto crimes and failures, passing them forward through generations until someone finally broke the cycle. Daniel had stumbled onto that cursed ground by accident, driven by desperation and ignorance. He'd lost months of his life to limbo and uncertainty. But he'd also found Victoria, found Kellerman's unexpected advocacy, found a path forward that led here. To a porch, a blue door, and a son sleeping peacefully in a home that was actually theirs. Maybe that was what the land had been waiting for all along. Not someone worthy, not someone deserving. Just someone willing to keep trying when everything said to quit. Someone who'd turn stumbling into standing, accident into intention, survival into something that looked enough like living to matter. Inside, Lucas cried out softly in his sleep, then settled. Daniel listened, making sure his son was okay, then stayed on the porch a while longer. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new uncertainties. But tonight, they had walls that were theirs, a roof that wouldn't be taken away, and the simple profound victory of having made it through. The sugar mill was someone else's problem now. And Daniel Reeves was finally, gratefully, home. 3 years passed like seasons over the small house with the blue door. Lucas grew tall and serious, his childhood drawings evolving into architectural sketches that covered the walls of his bedroom. He developed an obsession with structures, how buildings stood or fell, how foundations mattered more than facades. Daniel watched his son trace the bones of houses on graph paper and understood that the sugar mill had left its mark in ways neither of them talked about directly. The house itself had become something more than shelter. Daniel had spent those 3 years learning skills he'd never needed before. Plumbing, electrical work, carpentry beyond basic construction. He'd replaced the roof himself over 2 sweltering summer weeks, Lucas handing him shingles and asking questions about load-bearing and water drainage. The kitchen got updated piece by piece, Daniel doing the work on weekends while Lucas measured and calculated angles like it was homework. The hardware store job had turned into something more substantial. The owner, a man named Jean Broussard who'd run the business for 40 years, had recognized competence and desperation in equal measure. He promoted Daniel to assistant manager, then offered him a partnership when his own health started failing. Daniel had used the remainder of the settlement money as capital, becoming a partial owner of Broussard Hardware and Supply. It wasn't fortune. It wasn't even comfort by most standards. But it was stability built on something real, and that mattered more than Daniel had understood before the mill. Lucas turned 13 in February, the same month Daniel received an unexpected letter forwarded through Victoria's office. The return address was Federal Bureau of Investigation, New Orleans Field Office. Daniel opened it standing in the kitchen, Lucas doing homework at the table behind him. The letter was from Kellerman. Brief and formal, but with an undercurrent of something personal beneath the official language. The investigation into the Cartel tunnel network had concluded. 17 arrests made, including 3 high-ranking cartel operatives. The tunnel system had been permanently sealed, all 6 entry points filled with concrete. The property that had been the Cortez Sugar Mill was scheduled for demolition, the land to be sold at government auction. There was a second page. A personal note in handwriting Daniel recognized from documents Kellerman had signed during the investigation. Mr. Reeves, the note began. I wanted you to know that your cooperation, however accidental its origin, was instrumental in dismantling a trafficking operation that had operated in this parish for over 5 years. The arrests we made have disrupted cartel activities throughout the region. Lives have been saved because you made a phone call instead of pretending you saw nothing. I know the cost to you and your son was significant. I hope the years since have been kinder. The house I drove past last month when I was in the area, the one with the blue door, it looked like home. I hope it is. Respectfully, Marcus Kellerman. Daniel read the note twice, then folded it carefully and put it in the drawer where he kept important documents. Birth certificates, the deed to the house, Lucas's school records. The accumulated evidence of a life rebuilt. That's from the FBI guy? Lucas asked without looking up from his math homework. Yeah, Daniel said. The investigation's over. They caught the people using the tunnel. Lucas nodded, still focused on his calculations. Good. Daniel studied his son's profile, seeing Jennifer in the shape of his jaw, the way his hair fell across his forehead. Lucas didn't talk about his mother anymore, hadn't mentioned her in over a year. Daniel wasn't sure if that was healthy processing or unhealthy avoidance, but therapy had helped both of them navigate grief in ways that felt manageable if not resolved. The mill's being torn down, Daniel added. The building. Lucas looked up then, his expression unreadable. Can we go see it? Before they do? The request surprised Daniel. Why would you want to? Lucas set down his pencil. I don't know. I just feel like I should. We live there, kind of. For one night. And then everything changed. Daniel understood. The mill had marked a turning point, the lowest moment that had somehow led to something better. There was a need to witness its ending, to close the circle. I'll ask, Daniel said. Victoria made the arrangements. Kellerman granted permission for a supervised visit 1 week before the scheduled demolition. Daniel and Lucas drove out to the property on a Saturday morning, the Louisiana spring already humid and thick with the promise of summer heat. The mill looked smaller than Daniel remembered, diminished by time and perspective. The FBI had removed all their equipment, leaving the building gutted and empty. Chain link fencing still surrounded it, but the security cameras were gone. Warning signs about structural instability had been posted every 20 feet. Kellerman met them at the gate, looking older than Daniel remembered. 3 years and countless investigations had carved lines deeper into his face. "Thank you for this," Daniel said, shaking his hand. "Least I could do," Kellerman replied. He nodded to Lucas. "You've grown." Lucas had indeed grown. He stood nearly as tall as Daniel now, all awkward adolescent angles and emerging maturity. He studied the mill with the same intensity he brought to his architectural drawings. They walked the property together, Kellerman pointing out where tunnels had been discovered branching beneath other areas. The network had been vast, sophisticated, representing years of construction and millions in investment. All of it now sealed and useless. The main building's interior was exactly as Daniel remembered. Massive processing equipment still frozen in place, conveyor systems suspended in permanent incompletion. But the second-floor offices had been stripped. Their living space, the room where he and Lucas had spent one desperate night, was empty except for stains on the concrete floor marking where their sleeping bags had been. Lucas walked the perimeter slowly, running his hand along the walls. "This was going to save us," he said quietly. "You thought buying this place would fix everything." Daniel felt the words like a physical blow. "Yeah. I did. And instead it made everything worse," Lucas continued. For a while." "For a while," Daniel agreed. "But then it didn't," Lucas said, turning to face him. "It got bad, but then it got better. Better than before even. We got the house. You got the business. We got stable." Daniel moved to stand beside his son, both of them looking out the grimy window at the overgrown fields beyond. "Sometimes the worst decisions lead to the best outcomes," he said. "Not because the decisions were good, but because you survive them and learn." "Is that what happened?" Lucas asked. "We survived and learned?" Daniel thought about the question seriously. "I think we survived. I think we're still learning." They descended the stairs carefully, the metal groaning under their weight. At the ground floor, Kellerman was waiting, checking his watch. "5 more minutes," he said. "Then we need to clear out. Demolition crew does their final safety survey this afternoon." Lucas walked to the center of the processing floor, standing in a shaft of light filtering through the broken roof panels. He pulled out his phone, took a photo looking up at the machinery and shadows. "Why?" Daniel asked. "For my portfolio," Lucas said. "My architecture teacher says we should document buildings before they're gone. Study them. Understand why they were built and why they failed." "And why did this one fail?" Kellerman asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Lucas looked around thoughtfully. "Bad foundation," he said. "Not the physical foundation. The moral one. It was built on sugar, but it became about something else. Money laundering, drug trafficking. Once you build on the wrong foundation, the structure's compromised no matter how solid it looks." Kellerman glanced at Daniel with raised eyebrows. "He's got a good head on his shoulders." "He does," Daniel agreed, pride swelling in his chest. They left the mill for the last time, Daniel locking the gate behind them with a key he'd returned to Kellerman. As they walked to their vehicles, Lucas stopped suddenly. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we'd never found the tunnel?" he asked. "If we'd just lived here and never discovered it?" Daniel had thought about it. Often. In alternate realities that played out in his mind during sleepless nights. "We'd have been living on top of an active criminal operation," he said. "Eventually, something bad would have happened. Someone would have discovered us, or we'd have discovered them. It might have ended much worse. Or the tunnel might have been abandoned anyway," Lucas said. "And we'd have just lived here, and you'd have fixed it up, and it would have been our place." "Maybe," Daniel acknowledged. "But I don't think so. I think that building was cursed, not by ghosts or superstition, but by history. What Rafael Cortez did there in the 80s, what the cartel did after. Some places carry too much wrong to ever be made right." "Do you believe that?" Lucas pressed. That places can be cursed? Daniel considered his answer carefully. I believe places remember. And I believe that memory matters. The mill remembered corruption. Our house, the one with the blue door, it remembers being built by a family who wanted something simple and good. That memory matters. They drove home in comfortable silence, Lucas looking out the window at the Louisiana landscape rolling past. Bayous and cypress swamps, small towns and long stretches of nothing. The land that held all their history, good and bad. That evening, Daniel found Lucas in his room, working on a new drawing. Not a house this time, but a cross-section of a building showing all its hidden spaces. Foundation, walls, roof, and beneath it all, empty space where a tunnel might have been. What's this for? Daniel asked. School project, Lucas said. We're supposed to design a building and show everything, not just what people see from outside. All the hidden stuff that makes it work or makes it fail. Daniel sat on the edge of Lucas's bed, watching his son work. The precision in those young hands, the way he measured and calculated. Jennifer would have been proud. The thought came unbidden, still painful after all these years, but less devastating than before. Your mom was good at art, Daniel said. Did I ever tell you that? Lucas looked up, surprise evident. No. She was. Drawing, painting. She had a whole sketchbook full of landscapes and portraits. I don't know what happened to it after she died. Probably lost in one of our moves. What kind of landscapes? Lucas asked quietly. Places she wanted to go, Daniel said. Mountains, oceans, cities. She grew up in a small town like this and dreamed of getting out, seeing the world. Did she get out? For a while, Daniel said. We traveled some before you were born. Nothing exotic, just road trips. Texas, Arkansas, Tennessee. She said she was looking for a place that felt right, where she could stop running. Did she find it? I thought she had, Daniel said. I thought we were it. You and me and whatever life we built. But I guess I was wrong. Lucas set down his pencil. Mom's pain wasn't about you. That's what my therapist says. She says addiction is a disease, and it makes people hurt the ones they love most because those are the people they're safe enough with to fall apart around. Your therapist is smart, Daniel said. Yeah, Lucas agreed. She also costs $120 an hour. Daniel laughed, surprised by the sudden humor. Worth every penny, apparently. They sat quietly for a moment, the evening deepening outside Lucas's window. Crickets had started their nightly song, the sound of Louisiana summer approaching. I'm proud of you, Daniel said. How you've handled everything. The mill, the moves, all of it. You're stronger than I was at your age. I had to be, Lucas said simply. You needed me to be. The words hit hard because they were true. Daniel had leaned on his son's resilience, had needed Lucas to adapt because Daniel himself was barely keeping it together. The guilt of that would probably never fully fade. I'm sorry, Daniel said. For all the times I needed you to be strong when you should have just gotten to be a kid. Lucas looked at him directly. Dad, I am a kid. I'm 13. I still sleep with my stuffed rabbit sometimes when I have nightmares. But I'm also old enough to understand that you did your best with what you had. And your best was enough. Daniel pulled his son into a hug, feeling Lucas's thin arms wrap around him. When had the kid gotten so tall? When had he started saying things that sounded like wisdom instead of childhood observation? A month after their visit to the mill, Victoria called with unexpected news. The government auction for the mill property had been cancelled. Instead, the land was being transferred to the parish for conversion into a public park. Why? Daniel asked. Community pressure, Victoria explained. Once word got out about the demolition and auction, local activists pushed back. They argued the land had too much negative history, that selling it to private developers would just continue the cycle. The parish agreed to take it over, contingent on federal cleanup of contaminated soil and full remediation of the tunnel systems. So it'll be a park, Daniel said. Eventually, Victoria confirmed. They're talking about a memorial component too. Acknowledging the victims of trafficking, the damage the cartel operations caused to the community. Making something positive from all that negativity. That's good, Daniel said, and meant it. The park project moved slowly, funding issues and bureaucratic delays stretching months into years. Daniel followed its progress through local news, watching as the mill was demolished, the land cleared, soil tested and remediated. Lucas expressed interest in the architectural plans, studying how the designers intended to preserve certain structural elements while transforming the space. By the time Lucas turned 16, the park was nearing completion. The official opening was scheduled for autumn, a community celebration with speeches and ceremonies. Daniel received a personal invitation from the parish council, requesting his presence as someone whose actions had helped bring justice and transformation to the property. He almost declined. The attention made him uncomfortable, the idea of being celebrated for what had felt like pure accident and desperation. But Lucas convinced him to go. You were part of the story, Lucas argued. Pretending you weren't doesn't change that. And maybe other people need to hear that sometimes doing the right thing, even when it costs you everything, still matters. The park opening fell on a clear October Saturday, the kind of perfect Louisiana autumn day that made you forget the brutal summers and muggy springs. A crowd of several hundred people gathered, families and local officials, media representatives, and community activists. The park itself was beautiful. Walking trails wound through native plantings, the harsh industrial landscape softened by careful landscaping. Where the mill had stood, there was now an open plaza with informational plaques describing the property's history. Not sanitized, but honest. Rafael Cortez's crimes, the cartel operations, the federal investigation. And yes, a mention of Daniel Reeves, the single father whose discovery had helped end a trafficking network. Daniel stood with Lucas and Victoria as the parish president spoke about redemption and community resilience. When his name was mentioned, people turned to look at him, some with recognition, others with curiosity. He felt Lucas's hand grip his shoulder, grounding him. After the ceremony, people approached. Some thanked him. Others shared their own stories of how the cartel operations had touched their lives. A woman whose son had struggled with addiction thanked Daniel for helping shut down one avenue of drugs entering the parish. A man whose business had been unknowingly used as a front for money laundering expressed gratitude that the network had been exposed. Kellerman appeared near the end, looking uncomfortable in civilian clothes. He shook Daniel's hand firmly. "Good to see you doing well," the agent said. "Both of you." "You too," Daniel replied. "Heard you got promoted." Kellerman smiled slightly. "Desk job in Washington. Less exciting, but my wife appreciates me being home for dinner." They walked the park together, an odd trio. Federal agent, single father, and teenage son, united by a property that no longer existed except in memory and memorial plaques. At the eastern edge of the park, where the tunnel's main entrance had been sealed, there was a sculpture. Abstract metal work representing chains breaking, roots growing. A plaque read, "In memory of all those harmed by trafficking and violence. May this ground now nurture healing and hope." Lucas stood before it for a long time, his face thoughtful. Finally, he turned to Daniel. "Do you think it's possible?" he asked. "For a place to really change what it means? To go from cursed to blessed?" Daniel looked at the sculpture, the families playing in the park beyond, children laughing where machinery once ground cane into sugar and men once plotted criminal enterprises. "I think places are what we make them," Daniel said. "The ground doesn't change. It's still the same soil, the same earth. But what we build on it, what we choose to remember and honor, that changes everything." Kellerman nodded. "The land remembers, but people decide what to do with that memory. Build on it or bury it. Transform it or let it rot." They stood together in silence, 3 lives intersected by accident and transformed by choice. The land beneath them had witnessed Rafael Cortez's crimes, the cartel's operations, Daniel's desperate gamble, and now children playing in autumn sunshine. All of it part of the same story, the same soil. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Daniel and Lucas walked back to their truck. Victoria had already left, promising to call later in the week. Kellerman had disappeared into the crowd, back to his Washington desk job and ordinary concerns. "You glad we came?" Daniel asked as they drove home. "Yeah," Lucas said. It felt important. Like saying goodbye to something that shaped us but doesn't define us anymore. "That's surprisingly profound for a 16-year-old, Daniel said. "I have a good therapist," Lucas replied with a slight smile. They drove through the Louisiana twilight, past bayous and small towns, the landscape familiar now. Home. Not just the house with the blue door, but the entire parish, the whole imperfect region that had witnessed their worst moments in their rebuilding. When they pulled into their driveway, Lucas didn't immediately get out. He sat looking at the house, at the porch they'd added 2 summers ago, at the garden Daniel had planted last spring. "Dad?" Lucas said quietly. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not giving up. When we bought the mill, when we found the tunnel, when everything fell apart. You could have given up. Put me in foster care, walked away, just stopped trying. But you didn't." Daniel felt his throat tighten. "You made it impossible to give up. You deserved better than a father who quit." "I deserve the father I got," Lucas said. "The one who keeps trying even when everything's hard. That's the only kind of father worth having." They sat together in the truck as full darkness settled over their small corner of Louisiana. Inside the house, lights glowed warm and welcoming. Their home, built not from money or luck, but from stumbling forward when staying down seemed easier. From making one decent choice after a dozen terrible ones. From surviving long enough for survival to become living. Daniel thought about the sugar mill one last time. The building that had promised salvation and delivered chaos. The foundation so corrupted by history that nothing good could grow there until it was torn down completely and started over. Maybe that was the lesson. Sometimes you couldn't redeem what was broken. Sometimes you had to demolish it, clear the ground, and build something entirely new. Not forget what happened, but refuse to let it poison what came next. The park where the mill had stood would serve that purpose. A place that remembered darkness but chose light. Acknowledged pain but nurtured healing. Built on the same ground but reaching for different sky. Daniel and Lucas finally got out of the truck and walked to their blue door. Inside, dinner needed making, homework needed finishing, ordinary life needed living. The dramatic moments had passed. What remained was the quiet work of building a life worth keeping, day after ordinary day. And that, Daniel had learned, was the real triumph. Not the big moments or dramatic revelations. Just the steady accumulation of decent days, honest work, and a son who'd survived childhood trauma to become someone remarkable. The land remembered everything. Rafael Cortez's crimes, the cartel's tunnels, Daniel's desperate gamble, Lucas's resilience. All of it written in soil and concrete, memory and memorial. But the land also offered redemption to those willing to work for it. Willing to tear down what was broken and build something new. Willing to transform curse into possibility. Daniel Reeves had stumbled onto cursed ground and survived it. More than survived, transformed it into foundation for something better. And in the end, that was legacy enough. Not perfect, not heroic, just human. Flawed and trying, failing and rebuilding, stumbling towards something that looked enough like grace to matter. The blue door closed behind them, shutting out the Louisiana night. Inside, father and son began the familiar rhythm of evening routine. Dinner, dishes, conversation. The sacred ordinary of home. Outside, the land remembered. And in remembering, released them to whatever came next. 5 years slipped by like water through Louisiana soil, slow and inevitable, changing everything it touched. Lucas graduated high school with honors and a portfolio thick enough to earn him a full scholarship to Tulane's architecture program. Daniel stood in the crowd at the graduation ceremony, watching his son cross the stage, and felt the weight of every decision that had led them here. the sugar mill, the tunnel, the years of struggling and rebuilding. All of it compressed into this single moment of watching his boy become a man. The house with the blue door had expanded over those years. Daniel had added a workshop in the back, a proper studio space where Lucas could work on his designs during summer breaks. The kitchen had been fully renovated, the yard landscaped, the bones of the place strengthened until it no longer felt like a desperate purchase but a deliberate home. Jean Broussard had retired completely, leaving Daniel as the sole owner of the hardware store. It provided steady income, respect in the community, and the kind of rootedness Daniel had never imagined possible during those desperate months after buying the mill. Lucas came home for Thanksgiving of his sophomore year with a girlfriend, a sharp-eyed young woman named Maya who studied environmental engineering and asked direct questions about everything. She looked at the house, at the workshop, at the life Daniel and Lucas had built, and seemed to understand something essential without needing explanation. "Your dad told me about the sugar mill," she said one evening while helping Daniel prepare dinner. Lucas was in the workshop, working on a project. About finding the tunnel and everything that happened after. "Did he?" Daniel said, uncertain how much detail Lucas had shared. "He said it was the worst thing that could have happened that turned into the best thing." Maya peeled carrots with practiced efficiency, her hands quick and confident. "He said you taught him that sometimes survival means letting go of what you thought you needed and accepting what you actually have." "That sounds more articulate than anything I probably said," Daniel replied. "Maybe," Maya smiled. "But that's what he heard. And it shaped how he sees the world. He designs buildings now thinking about what happens when things go wrong. How do people survive? How do structures adapt? He's not interested in perfection. He's interested in resilience." Daniel absorbed this quietly. He'd never thought of himself as teaching anything beyond basic survival skills. But maybe that was the lesson. Maybe resilience was the only thing worth passing down. Lucas and Maya left after the weekend, driving back to New Orleans in Lucas's used truck, and Daniel stood on the porch watching them go. The house felt larger in their absence, emptier but not lonely. Just quiet in a way that felt earned. Victoria called the following week with news that stirred memories Daniel thought had settled into comfortable distance. The memorial park where the sugar mill had stood was receiving an award from a National Preservation Society. Recognition for transforming a site of criminal activity into a space of community healing. The parish was planning a ceremony, and they wanted Daniel to speak. "I'm not a public speaker," Daniel protested. "You don't need to be," Victoria said. "You just need to tell the truth about what happened. Your story, your experience. People need to hear that doing the right thing, even when it costs you, matters." Daniel agreed reluctantly, spending the next 2 weeks drafting and redrafting remarks that never felt adequate. How did you compress years of desperation and transformation into a 5-minute speech? How did you explain that the worst mistake of your life had somehow led to the best outcome without making it sound like cheap inspiration? The ceremony took place on a cold December afternoon, the kind of Louisiana winter day that carried unexpected bite. The park had matured in the 5 years since its opening, trees grown taller, walking paths worn smooth by thousands of feet. Families gathered despite the cold, community members and officials, people whose lives had been touched by the property's dark history and its redemptive transformation. Daniel stood at a podium facing the crowd, Lucas and Maya in the front row, Victoria off to one side. He'd memorized his remarks but found himself abandoning the script once he started speaking. "I bought the Cortez Sugar Mill for $350 because I was broke and desperate and out of options," he began, his voice carrying across the quiet crowd. "I thought I was buying shelter for my son and myself. What I actually bought was the end of one life and the beginning of another." He talked about finding the tunnel, about the terror of discovering he'd stumbled into something far beyond his understanding. About months of uncertainty and the kindness of strangers who'd helped when they didn't have to. About learning that sometimes the land holds secrets that demand reckoning. "This park stands where that building stood," Daniel continued. "Same ground, same soil. But what grows here now is different. Not because the earth changed, but because people chose to plant something better. chose to remember the darkness while refusing to let it define the future. He paused, looking at the faces watching him. Some he recognized, others were strangers. All of them part of this community that had absorbed his family's crisis and transformation. "My son is studying architecture now," Daniel said, gesturing toward Lucas. "He designs buildings that can survive disasters, that can adapt when things go wrong. He learned that here, from this ground, from what happened when we tried to make a home in a place built on corruption. The land taught us that foundations matter. That you can't build anything lasting on rottenness, no matter how good the structure looks from outside." He finished his remarks and stepped back, uncertain whether he'd said anything meaningful or just rambled through personal history. But the applause was genuine, and afterward, people approached with stories of their own. How the park had become a place their family gathered. How the memorial plaques had helped them process their own encounters with trafficking and addiction. How transformation was possible if you were willing to do the work. Kellerman appeared near the end, grayer now, his Washington desk job apparently aging him faster than field work had. He shook Daniel's hand with familiar firmness. "Well said," the former agent offered. "Simple truth carries more weight than polished speeches." "You here officially?" Daniel asked. "Vacation," Kellerman replied. "Visiting family in the area. Saw the ceremony was happening and thought I'd pay respects." They walked the park together one more time, retracing paths where machinery once stood, where tunnels had been sealed, where Daniel's desperate gamble had unfolded. The memorial sculpture gleamed in the winter sunlight, its abstract forms suggesting both chains and roots, bondage and growth. "You ever think about what would have happened if you'd walked away?" Kellerman asked. "If you'd found that tunnel and just left, pretended you never saw it?" "Every day for the first year," Daniel admitted. "Then less frequently. Now hardly at all. But yeah, I think about it. I think I would have spent the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for something terrible to catch up with us." "That's the thing about doing the right thing," Kellerman said. "It doesn't always make life easier. But it makes sleep easier. Makes looking at yourself in the mirror easier." They parted with promises to stay in touch that both knew would fade into occasional emails and holiday cards. Some relationships existed for specific moments, specific purposes. They didn't need to extend beyond that to matter. Lucas approached as Kellerman departed, Maya beside him. They'd been walking the park, examining the architectural elements, discussing design choices. "This is good work," Lucas said, gesturing at the park's layout. "Whoever designed this understood the site's history and didn't try to erase it. Just transformed it. That's what you'll do someday," Daniel said. "Transform places that need it." "Maybe," Lucas allowed. "If I'm lucky enough to get projects that matter." They drove home as winter darkness fell early, the Louisiana landscape fading into shadow. The house welcomed them with warm light and the promise of dinner, normalcy reasserting itself after the ceremony's emotional weight. That night, after Lucas and Maya had gone to bed, Daniel sat on the porch despite the cold. The neighborhood was quiet, lights glowing in windows up and down the street. Ordinary lives being lived in ordinary homes. He'd become part of that ordinariness through years of steady work and decent choices. The drama had passed. What remained was simply living. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "You did good today." Theodore Ashworth would have been proud. Daniel stared at the message, confused. "Who's Theodore Ashworth?" Victoria's response came quickly. "Wrong person. Sorry. Working on another case. Old man who hid a fortune in a sawmill. Similar story to yours, different outcome." Daniel smiled at the coincidence. The world was full of desperate people making desperate choices, stumbling onto other people's secrets, trying to survive long enough to become something more than their circumstances. His story wasn't unique. It was just the version he'd lived. Lucas graduated from Tulane 3 years later with job offers from firms in Houston, Atlanta, and New Orleans. He chose New Orleans, wanting to stay close to Louisiana, to the landscape that had shaped him. Maya had graduated the same year and taken a position with the Environmental Protection Agency, working on soil remediation projects. They moved into a shotgun house in the Bywater, beginning their own adult lives while remaining tethered to family and history. Daniel visited monthly, making the drive to New Orleans and marveling at his son's independence. Lucas's apartment was filled with architectural models and drawings, his professional work already showing the distinctive approach Maya had identified years earlier. Buildings designed for resilience, for survival when systems failed, for adaptation rather than rigid perfection. "You're making a name for yourself," Daniel observed during one visit, looking at a model of a community center Lucas had designed for a flood-prone neighborhood. "I'm trying to build things that last," Lucas said. "Things that can take a hit and keep standing. Seems important." Daniel understood what went unsaid. The sugar mill had been built to last but had failed because its foundation was corrupt. Lucas was designing structures that acknowledged vulnerability while building in strength. It was the architectural equivalent of everything they'd learned. Jean Broussard died the following spring, peacefully in his sleep at 87. Daniel attended the funeral, representing the hardware store and his own gratitude for the old man's faith in a desperate stranger. Jean's children had no interest in the business, so Daniel bought them out completely, becoming the sole owner of Broussard Hardware and Supply. He kept the name, honoring the man who'd given him a chance. Changed the sign slightly though, adding a line beneath the original text. "Family-owned since 1967. It felt right, acknowledging continuity even as ownership changed hands. Lucas turned 27 the same year Daniel turned 50. Maya planned a surprise party, gathering friends and family at their New Orleans home. Daniel drove down with a gift he'd been working on for months, a wooden box he'd built in his workshop, crafted from reclaimed timber salvaged from old Louisiana buildings. Inside, he'd placed photographs documenting their journey. The trailer they'd been evicted from, though Daniel had no actual photo of that and had to sketch it from memory. The sugar mill on the day they'd bought it. Their house with its blue door. Lucas's graduation. The memorial park. A visual history of survival and transformation. Lucas opened it during the party, surrounded by friends who knew pieces of his story but not the complete arc. He looked at each photograph slowly, his expression shifting from surprise to recognition to something deeper. "This is our history," Lucas said quietly. "This is proof we made it," Daniel corrected. "Proof that we were there, that it happened, that we survived it." Later, after the party had wound down and guests had departed, Daniel and Lucas sat on the porch of the shotgun house, sharing a beer in the humid New Orleans night. "I've been thinking about buying property," Lucas said. "Maya and I want to build our own house. Something we design together, something permanent." "That's a big step," Daniel said. "So is buying a sugar mill for $350, Lucas replied with a slight smile. Daniel laughed. "Fair point. You learn from my mistakes though. Check for tunnels before you commit." "Already on the list," Lucas assured him. Right after foundation inspection and before closing. They sat in comfortable silence, father and son, no longer divided by desperation or uncertainty. Just two men who'd survived together and built something worth keeping. "Where are you thinking?" Daniel asked. "For the property?" "There's land available near the memorial park," Lucas said. "The parish is developing some of the adjacent parcels. Maya and I looked at a lot last week. Good soil, no flood risk, close to where that mill used to stand." Daniel felt something shift in his chest. "You want to build near there? After everything?" "Because of everything," Lucas corrected. "That ground taught us what matters. Seems right to build something good there, something that lasts for the right reasons." Daniel understood. The land had witnessed their lowest point and their transformation. Building there wouldn't erase that history. It would acknowledge it while refusing to be defined by it. The years continued their steady progression. Daniel sold the hardware store at 55, tired of the daily grind but financially secure enough to retire comfortably. Lucas and Maya built their house on land adjacent to the memorial park, a beautiful modern structure that incorporated sustainable design and resilient engineering. They married in a small ceremony in the park itself, standing near the sculpture where the tunnel entrance had been sealed. Daniel walked Maya down the aisle, her own father having passed years earlier. It felt right, this blending of families and histories, all of them rooted in soil that remembered darkness but chose growth. Lucas's first child, a daughter they named Jennifer after her grandmother, was born 2 years later. Daniel held his granddaughter in the hospital and felt time fold in on itself. The woman his daughter was named for had struggled and failed and died too young. But her name would live on in this new life, this fresh beginning. Legacy wasn't about perfection. It was about continuation, about refusing to let failure be the final word. Daniel was 60 when he received a call from a documentary filmmaker interested in the sugar mill story. The memorial park had gained national attention, cited as a model for community-based transformation of properties with criminal histories. The filmmaker wanted to interview Daniel, Lucas, Kellerman, Victoria, anyone connected to the discovery and its aftermath. Daniel almost declined. The story felt private, personal, not something for public consumption. But Lucas convinced him otherwise. Other people are going through what we went through, Lucas argued. Other desperate families making terrible choices, stumbling into impossible situations. Maybe hearing that survival is possible helps someone keep going when quitting seems easier. The documentary took a year to produce. Daniel watched the finished product at a private screening, seeing his younger self in old photographs, hearing his voice describe desperation he'd almost forgotten. The film wove together multiple perspectives, showing how one man's discovery had rippled through an entire community, disrupting criminal networks while transforming a cursed property into a place of healing. It premiered at a small film festival in Louisiana, winning an award for documentary storytelling. Daniel attended with Lucas, Maya, and young Jennifer, now 3 years old and fascinated by the big screen showing her grandfather's face. "That's Papa," she announced loudly during a quiet moment, pointing at the screen. The audience laughed, the sound warm and affectionate. Daniel felt Lucas's hand on his shoulder, steady and reassuring. They'd made it. Against every reasonable expectation, they'd survived and thrived. The documentary brought renewed attention to the memorial park. Visitors came from other states, people dealing with similar properties in their own communities, looking for models of transformation. The parish expanded the park, adding educational components about trafficking, addiction, and community resilience. Daniel became an informal advisor, sharing his experience with other communities facing similar challenges. He never claimed expertise, just lived experience. But sometimes that was enough. Sometimes hearing that someone else had survived gave people the courage to keep trying. He was 65 when Lucas called with news that Maya was pregnant again. A son this time, healthy and due in spring. They wanted to name him Daniel, carrying forward the family legacy of stubborn survival. "You don't have to do that," Daniel protested. "Name him something fresh, something without all the weight." "Dad," Lucas said firmly. "That weight is what held us together when everything else was falling apart. That weight is worth carrying." Daniel Jr. was born on a warm April morning, arriving early and healthy. Daniel Sr. held his grandson in the hospital, looking into eyes that held all the promise of beginnings, and felt the circle complete itself. From desperate father to grandfather, from the man who'd bought a cursed building to the man whose family had built something lasting on cursed ground. The land remembered everything. Rafael Cortez's crimes, the cartel's tunnels, Daniel's desperate gamble, Lucas's resilience, and now these children growing up near ground that had been transformed from site of darkness to place of light. But memory wasn't prison. Memory was foundation, context, the bedrock on which new growth became possible. The soil held it all without judgment, offering itself to whatever seeds were planted, whatever structures were built. Daniel Reeves had stumbled onto cursed ground and survived it. More than survived. He'd helped transform it, not through grand gestures but through simple persistence. One honest choice after another. One day of not quitting followed by another and another until survival became living and living became legacy. The sugar mill was gone, demolished and buried. But what it had taught remained. That foundations matter. That corruption compromises everything built upon it. That sometimes the worst mistakes lead to the best outcomes if you survive long enough to learn the lesson. Daniel sat on his porch on a quiet evening, watching the Louisiana sun set in shades of orange and purple. The blue door behind him, the house that had been built from desperation and maintained through determination. His family thriving in ways he'd never imagined possible during those dark months after buying the mill. The land had given back what it had taken. Not immediately, not easily, but eventually. And that was the final lesson. The ground beneath our feet holds everything, remembers everything, and offers everything to those patient enough to work with it rather than against it. Daniel's phone buzzed. A text from Lucas with a photo. Young Jennifer and baby Daniel playing in their yard, the memorial park visible in the background. A new generation growing up on transformed ground, carrying forward a legacy they'd eventually understand but didn't need to bear as burden. Just evidence of survival, Daniel thought. Proof that doing the right thing, even when it costs everything, eventually pays dividends impossible to calculate in the moment of sacrifice. The sun touched the horizon, painting the Louisiana sky in fire. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to prove that the lessons learned on cursed ground could translate to blessed soil. But tonight, Daniel allowed himself the rare luxury of contentment. The story that had begun with $350 in desperate hope had grown into something larger than its origins. A family rooted and thriving. A community transformed. A legacy earned through stumbling forward when staying down seemed easier. The land remembered. And in remembering, released them all to whatever came next. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.